Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Robertson, and welcome to the showcase video for the Perseus-Class Fast Attack Craft that I've just released onto the Steam Workshop. And as you can see, it's anchored just off the coast here, which means that we'll have to use the launch rib in order to get back on board. In this video, like the one I did about the Pegasus, I will begin with a brief tour of the vessel, followed by a quick overview of its capabilities and how to use its weapons. Now, as some of the more observant of you may have noticed, this rib does not have a steering wheel. That's right, it's piloted by remote control instead, using channel 1, just like it says on the instructions next to the remote, which I've included for those of you that don't read the description on the workshop or might just be a little slow on the uptake. But Captain, I hear some of you say, why did you do that? Well, my esteemed viewers, let's just say that I have a very good reason for keeping the profile of the rib as low as possible, and you'll find out why soon enough. You will also notice that the Perseus has a mag-all anchor system, which is extremely useful when the wind picks up and the sea gets a little choppy. It's not quite as effective during storms, but it'll still help to prevent the vessel from drifting away too far, which is always a good thing, especially if there's rocks nearby. Ah, that's what I was afraid would happen. I didn't slow down fast enough and it's attached to the wrong connector. It's not a problem though, as the rib does fit on the deck either way around. But saying that, it will be faster if I just reverse and manually connect the winch the right way around. You know what? I was tempted to just stop recording and start again from the beginning, but I'm going to leave this in because I think it's good to sometimes leave in when things don't always go according to plan. Besides, I know there's a few of you out there that get a kick of watching me struggle when things go pear-shaped, and I'd hate to disappoint. There we go, easily fixed. Oh, and before I forget, a special mention goes to Shadow Singularity for correctly guessing what ship this is based on after I released a work-in-progress screenshot, as the Type 148 Tiger is indeed a variant of the La Combattante 2 that was in use by the German Navy, so well done, Shadow Singularity. Just need to make sure I switch on the right connectors. I always get the top side and underside ones mixed up for some reason. But that's always the risk when you're using other workshop creations and the buttons are in a completely different place. Anyway, if we press this button, it should lower the davit completely, making it flush with the deck. Perfect. Sadly, in Stormworks we can't make a dinghy that's small enough to fit up there between those missile launchers like in the real life La Combattante, so it's attached to the stern instead, right in front of that gun turret, which is why the low profile is so important. Anyhow, without further ado, let's begin the tour, and since it's the closest, let's begin with the steering gear room. As expected, there's not much to this room except for a handful of relevant microcontrollers and some bilge pumps of course. Next up, we have the equipment and storage room, along with the aft turret mechanism. As the name suggests, you can find both cold weather clothing and diving equipment, along with a compressor to refill the oxygen tanks. There's some underwater welding torches, firefighting equipment, and if you look over here, there's even a cabinet where you can find spear guns, flares, and glow sticks. And here we have the aft turret mechanism and magazine, where there's an autoloader and an additional 1000 rounds of 50 caliber BMG ammo for the turret above. Next we have the aft crew quarters. These are meant for the officers and chief petty officers, and as such, whilst they're still relatively cramped, they do tend to be more luxurious than those used by the enlisted personnel. This one, for example, is a lot more spacious, comes with a larger table and a sink. And here we have the ship's head, which is naval terminology for a toilet and washroom, complete with a shower, toilet cubicle and a sink. Unlike with the Pegasus, this ship has several of these, as there's more crew and their quarters are further apart. And now we have the engine room. Here you can find the two large engines that provide power to the propellers or screws, along with a separate ship service diesel generator or SSDG. This, as the name suggests, produces the electricity required to keep the main battery charged and to provide power to all the lights and electrical systems on board, particularly while the ship is stationary. The two large engines also have their own generators that can produce additional power, but unless you're running the radar and sonar systems all the time, you won't really need those. And as with the offshore patrol vessels, all three engines are managed by the very talented Uranwind's modular engine controller that you can also find on the Steam Workshop. Next up we have the equipment or auxiliary machine room. Here you can find various utility machines, mostly cosmetic in Stormworks, along with the auxiliary battery and even a charging station with 2 free slots that you can use to recharge any radios, torches, NVGs, etc. Passing through this access corridor, which we'll come back to later on, we arrive at the all-important CIC, which is essentially the heart of the ship, as even though you'll be navigating from the bridge or pilot house, this is where you'll be when the combat begins. As with all my other creations, I've tried to keep things relatively detailed yet avoid any unnecessary greebling, both to keep the cost and weight down in career mode as well as to maintain in-game performance. And as you can see, as well as the CO station with its own radar, we also have some dials here that show you the status of all the important ship systems, including flood warning, battery charge, engine status and fuel level. I've also added a weather report display for anyone looking for more information on what it's like outside before venturing on the deck or using the rib. And now we have the weapons station. We'll get around to shooting stuff later on, so right now I'll just go over the basics. First off, you'll notice that after switching those screens on that we have both a camera view and an overhead map view. The one on the left is for direct fire, whilst the one on the right is the missile targeting computer. As expected, you can use those icons to move it around, zoom in and out, and even activate the radar. It's based on altitude, so the green blips tend to be surface targets, whilst the yellow ones are usually aircraft. Switching on the fire control systems will let you move the camera around using the WASD keys by default, as we can see from that R2-D2 looking thing that's spinning around out there. You can slave the weapons to where the optics are pointing by arming the respective gun turret, whereupon it'll turn and face the point under your crosshair, providing it's within range and that turret's firing arc of course. As you can see, both turrets are now following my crosshairs. To fire, it's simply a case of pulling the trigger, but we'll do that later on when we actually have a valid target to shoot at. The other readouts on the camera screen are just the compass bearing at the top and ammo counts at the bottom. But what I'll also show you now is how to use the fire control radar to track and then lock onto a target. This will not only keep it centered on the screen, but it'll also relay the targeting information to any of the weapons systems that are armed. Which means that 76mm cannon is now automatically following that helicopter we locked onto. But not only that, it's leading it based on speed and distance, so if I were to pull the trigger right now, you can guarantee that some, if not most of those rounds would actually hit. You will also notice that the other turret, however, isn't tracking it. That's because it is considered to be outside of its effective range, which unfortunately is only 800 meters. Anyway, let's just turn this all off, as I certainly don't want to be accused of committing any war crimes. What is also worth mentioning is that the missile panel also has its own counter showing the missiles remaining, and an arming switch. The other counter to the top left under the radar warning receiver shows you how many chaff you have remaining. These can be launched from both the CIC and the pilot house. Speaking of which, you can override the speed and the steering from the pilot house from down here as well, allowing you to effectively maneuver the ship during combat. Right, that'll do for now. Let's carry on with the tour. Now, unlike the real-life Le Combattant 2, the Perseus doesn't have a radio equipment or computer room next to the CIC. Instead, I've swapped them around for rooms that contain all the important microcontrollers and just called them electronics equipment rooms, just like on the Pegasus. Otherwise, it really would just be wasted space. But as you can see here, we do have a very basic radio that has a touchscreen and some toggle buttons. Moving on now, we have the forward magazine. Here we have the turret mechanism and autoloader for the 76mm Auto Melara turret. It has 80 rounds ready to fire and another 80 in the autoloader below. Plus some additional rounds in the ammo drums to the left that will need to be manually placed in the autoloader once the initial rounds are all used up. We also have a small arms cabinet that's unlocked using the code 826, which is a reference to my Space Engineers series. That will give you access to all of the goodies inside, which are essentially the same as can be found on the Pegasus. There we go. And over to the right we have the armour lockers, each with plate carriers and helmets, ideal for when you need to protect yourself in a combat situation. And here we have the forward cruise berthing, which is essentially the cruise quarters for the enlisted personnel. Unlike the quarters we saw previously, these are significantly less luxurious and a lot more cramped, but they are no less functional. They even have their own toilet and shower. Whilst smaller than the one we saw earlier, this one works just as well. And as we move forward, we see that there's even a table and a couple of chairs. Now ladies and gentlemen, whilst this may look cramped in Stormworks, let me tell you, the real life version is even worse. Well, that's the lower deck complete, so we may as well make our way up to the next level. Oh my Captain, what a poor example you're setting. You've left the bosun's storeroom open when you deployed the anchor earlier. Oh well, I may as well show you all how to collect the anchor and store it whilst I'm here. It's pretty much self-explanatory, so I'll only chip in when needed until I'm done. Yeah, you can dive into the water to collect the anchor, but I'm just being lazy. Come on, you bugger, turn around. Oh, that was surprisingly easy. Not that I'm complaining, of course. Anyway, continuing our tour now, we find ourselves on the upper deck. In fact, I'd better show you all the deck house first before we come back here, so bear with me for a few seconds. Yes, sorry, here's the deck house, which contains the hatch that allows us access to the refueling port as well as the onshore power connector. That's right folks, this vessel has the ability to both pump fuel in and out, which as you can imagine is extremely useful, especially in career mode. I've also added the adapter here, which will not only let you use the older style fluid connector, but will also connect two fluid ports together, which, funnily enough, helps to reduce the elastic banding effect we seem to get with the current fluid hoses, where they can pull even a cruise ship into the harbour wall. Yeah, Stormworks devs, please fix. Heading back in now, it's worth mentioning that the passageway just before we entered the CIC also links up to this upper part of the deck. It even has a small supply cabinet containing some emergency equipment, and I've even made sure to place things like that at key points throughout the ship. And there's even a thermostat that you can use to adjust the temperature. Next up, we have the medical room, containing pretty much everything you need for a basic rescue operation. Here we have the stainless steel galley, complete with fridge freezer, coffee machine, sink, storage cupboards, and even an electric hob and oven. Ideal for keeping your crew well fed. Next we have the captain's quarters, and as expected, this is probably the most luxurious quarters in the entire ship, proving once again that rank does indeed have its privileges. And here we have the crew's mess, where everyone can eat and socialise. Sadly, both this and the medical room don't actually exist in the real-life version of the vessel. Instead, both spaces are taken up with radar and communication equipment. But hey, this is Stormworks, so I think I'm allowed to improvise a little bit. And here we have the engineer's operating station, where we can find the breakers as well as the console that gives the engineer all the information they could ever need regarding the status of the vessel, including any flooding, battery charge, engine RPS, temperature, ballast and fuel level. All of this guarantees that the chief engineer and the crew under him have everything they need in order to ensure the smooth operation of the Perseus-Class Fast Attack Craft. We also have one more head, or toilet, located on this deck. It's a lot smaller than all the others and doesn't have a shower, but it's ideal for anyone working nearby. And finally we have the bridge, or pilot house, which, funnily enough, is used to pilot this vessel. You can find the helmsman, officer of the day, and even the captain up here whilst not in combat. There's a couple of utility systems up here, along with some storage for the binoculars and night vision goggles, a touchscreen radio, and even access to the upper deck, which we may as well visit now before coming back down again. As you can see, the view from up here is excellent, and you can even use the elevated platform next to old R2-D2 there to get a better look at what's around us, such as that island that we just came from. And over there in front where we can see... yeah, some random animal swimming around in circles. Only in Stormworks, ladies and gentlemen. Only in Stormworks. Well, at least things look fairly normal over there. So that's something at least. Well, coming back now to the CO station in the pilot house, we have access to things such as the touchscreen radio, where we can adjust the channel and use the push-to-talk function, all from using the touchscreen, which is really useful. We also have access to the chaff launcher, writing mechanism, depth sounder, and probably most important of all, the radar and sonar screen. This uses the updated version of Zizo's excellent sonar and radar map and works really well. The only thing I would change is that I would like to see fixed radar ranges and have the distance shown on the bottom left there be the maximum range shown and not that of the inner circle, as that can get a little confusing. Now, even though the Perseus has sonar, it is a missile boat and not a dedicated anti-submarine vessel. Rather, it would be expected to harass the sonar contact and call in ASW aircraft or ships in order to deal with that threat instead. There's also an emergency beacon locator as well as a switch for turning the alarms off. Now, one of the unique upgrades this vessel has is a pair of pulsed waterjet bow thrusters. Sadly, since they don't exist in Stormworks, I've had to get creative, so I've added a hidden propeller and then stuck two decorative hose nozzles on the underside of the bow, which I think works pretty damn well if you ask me. I mean, let's face it, at the end of the day, the end result is pretty much the same. As you would expect, there's also a variety of lighting options available, such as nav lights, instrument lights, the ability to toggle nighttime lighting, and even a modestly powerful spotlight on the ship's bow. I've also added some deck lights as well to assist the crew during low light conditions, but to see the true benefit of those, I'll have to quickly go into the creative menu here and change the time of day. There we are, that should be dark enough now. I've even added a towing light, which I'll just switch on right now. This is just to let other ships know that there's something behind you and to be careful when approaching. I was tempted to use that touchscreen nav light microcontroller, but eventually decided against it, just to keep things simple. Anyway, I think that pretty much covers all the boring stuff. Let's get these engines started and take this thing for a spin. It is worth noting that the Perseus has both a touchscreen nav map with waypoint autopilot and a basic heading hold autopilot, which, to be honest, I find myself using more often, especially if I just want the ship to stay on course whilst I leave the pilot house for a few seconds. You'll notice that I've just switched to low gear mode. This is only really used when you need to manoeuvre in and out of a harbour or to approach something as slowly as possible. Otherwise, I wouldn't recommend leaving it on. There, that's better. As mentioned on the Steam Workshop, this vessel has a top speed of just over 40 knots, but that's with the engines rigged for emergency speed. Otherwise, it's around 30 knots. It's not advised to keep the engines at emergency speed though, as this will burn through fuel much quicker and make them run hot, which is not ideal in a warmer climate. And to switch to emergency speed, all you need to do is hit the button just below or press hotkey number 2 from the helmsman station. There, as you can observe, we're now going well in excess of 40 knots, but that's because the conditions are perfect. But as mentioned earlier, this does put extra strain on the engines. In fact, you can tell that you're set for emergency speed not only from the yellow toggle button in the pilot house, but there's also a warning light in both the CIC and the engineer's operating station. You know what, folks? It's a little too calm. I'm supposed to be showcasing what this ship can do, which means it's time to go back into the creative menu again and change things up a bit. Yeah, that's more like it. Luckily, the Perseus is very difficult to capsize, thanks to the active stabilization system it has, which uses a combination of weight, fins and even ballast to help keep it upright. And even on the rare occasion when it does flip over, there is a righting mechanism that kicks in after about 30 seconds. Alternatively, you can just activate it earlier by pressing the respective button in the pilot house. But with all that being said, don't forget that this ship is still more or less a coastal missile boat with a low profile. As a result, its seagoing ability isn't great. And as you can already see here, there is a lot of green water that ends up on the deck during rough seas. And while this won't sink the ship, it does make it very dangerous for any crew that are stuck working out there. So you will need to be careful, especially if you're playing with friends in multiplayer. Speaking of which, one of my friends on Steam saw the Perseus whilst I was still working on it and asked, "Is this a replacement for the PHM Pegasus that Smivo and I made a few years back?" And the answer to that is no, it's not meant as a replacement, it's more of a less mechanically complex and thus less glitchy alternative to it. And I plan to update both going forward. I've also made the Perseus in anticipation of any future low-intensity career combat missions, made either by Zizo, Snake21JPN, or, though less likely, the Stormworks devs themselves. Which is another reason why it doesn't use any deprecated components, as I want this to be as career-friendly as possible. Yeah, I know, as time goes by it does look a lot less likely we'll ever get combat missions in Stormworks, but hey, I am trying to remain optimistic. Well, I think that's enough rolling around in 100% wins and pretty much proves how stable the Perseus is. All that's left now is to move on to the next section where we actually get to shoot at things. So, using the magic of video editing, I'll see you there. Right, first off we're going to use the missile launch computer to fire a missile at a distant target using a waypoint. You can do this by clicking the yellow crosshair icon on the screen, then press the Designate Missile Target with Coordinates button. This will turn the crosshair bright yellow, meaning it's ready to fire. The second way of doing it is via your own map view, where you can add one of your own waypoints using the keyboard on the launch computer, like this. In fact, you can change the waypoint as many times as you like, and it'll keep on updating it on the screen. Anyway, our target for today is an enemy AI-controlled gunboat that's circling that island to the northwest, so I'm just going to use the icon method to place the waypoint, Designate it. But watch what happens if you try to launch the missile when it's not armed. That's right, you always have to arm it before it'll fire. It's just a safety feature. And there it goes. Okay, let's quickly teleport over there and see if we manage to score a hit. Here it comes. Excellent. Yep, that's one less enemy missile boat to worry about. Well, now that we know how to shoot at something beyond visual range, let's try our hand at shooting at something a little closer. Just like when we were using the guns from earlier, all we need to do is switch on the fire control systems, then the fire control radar, and finally lock onto that large target drone over there. The targeting information should automatically be going to the missile computer, so now it's just a case of arming it and then firing. There we go, a direct hit. And if you're up against a particularly large target, you can even fire multiple missiles at once. Excellent. Well, that's pretty much all there is to it with regards to how the missiles work. The guns, or artillery to use correct terminology, is just as easy. Once you've locked onto your target, it's just a case of arming the weapon and then pulling the trigger, as the fire control radar and ballistics computer should do all the rest. In fact, as mentioned earlier, if you want to shoot without radar assistance, you can just turn the fire control radar off and eyeball it, which is certainly an option against the larger or slower moving targets. Yeah, I think that'll do for now. Let's try shooting at something that's a lot smaller and faster. Yeah, before you ask, no, I'm not going to waste a missile on this thing. I'm going to stick with a cannon. And down it goes. Well folks, that concludes our weapons demonstration, and I think it's time to wrap things up for this evening. I hope you all found it informative, but if you've got any further questions, please don't hesitate to post them in the comment section below. Ladies and gentlemen, you can find a link to the Perseus-Class Fast Attack Craft on the Steam Workshop in this video's description. As always, I would like to close by giving a heartfelt thanks to all of my amazing followers, viewers and subscribers out there that have shown me such incredible support all these years, and I look forward to seeing you all again in the next video. Until then, this is Robertson, signing off.